The clinical snap of a heavy brass stamp on paper is a sound I know in my bones. It's the sound of a certified structural approval. Tonight, I stood outside the glass walls of the Vance Real Estate Gala in Atlanta, watching my mother, Brenda, raise a champagne flute. She was toasting my sister Kayla's upcoming wedding, publicly dismissing me as the family's greatest mistake, and joking to the crowd that they only kept me around out of sheer pity. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just opened my laptop. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I didn't break down or beg for my seat back at their table. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. With exactly $750 left in my emergency account and my house keys left deliberately on the kitchen counter, I walked away before the toasts were even finished. I caught a late-night bus heading southeast, arriving in an industrial loft district in Savannah by morning. I rented a cramped backroom office located directly above a municipal blueprint archive. It smelled like old paper and industrial dust, but it was completely mine. To keep the lights on, I worked overnight shifts, feeding thousands of paper specifications into industrial scanning machines. That's where I earned the trust of Naomi. She was a pragmatic forensic restoration student working the archives, and she noticed my meticulous attention to detail. Naomi taught me exactly how altered ink layers and subtle digital shifts leave permanent forensic shadows on digital blueprints. She showed me that nothing is ever truly erased, no matter how clever the forgery. During those long, quiet nights in the archive, I began to understand the mechanics of my own family. I analyzed our history through the architecture of coerced compliance. High-achieving family systems operate like ruthless corporate entities. They condition their designated scapegoats to accept professional gaslighting until the final breaking point. I had been the silent investor in their version of family, subsidizing their pristine image with my sanity. They designed a dynamic where my compliance was expected and my boundaries were treated as breaches of contract. It is a psychological framework built on the premise that the scapegoat will always fold under the pressure of isolation. They manufacture a reality where your only value is your utility to the family brand. But they made a critical miscalculation. By stripping away my emotional attachment, they removed my blind spots. Love had been a subscription, with me footing the bill. Now, the subscription was permanently canceled. My days became a masterclass in survival and precision. I stopped trying to summon regret. There was only clarity. I wasn't experiencing a breakdown. I was auditing a balance sheet. I lived on cheap coffee and day-old bakery bread, pouring every ounce of my energy into mastering the digital forensic skills Naomi shared. I learned to track the invisible metadata attached to architectural seals. I learned how to prove exactly when and where a document had been altered down to the millisecond. The Vance family thought they had discarded a broken component. They didn't realize they had simply relocated me to a place where I could study the exact blueprints of their manipulation. My time in Savannah wasn't a punishment. It was a rigorous training ground. I worked with clinical detachment. Every file I processed sharpened my focus. Every digital shadow I uncovered taught me how to look past the surface of things. The archive was cold, quiet, and perfectly logical. It was the exact environment I needed to transform my grief into a precise, unyielding weapon. For years, I had provided invisible labor for the Vance real estate empire. I drafted the heavy engineering calculations for my father Arthur's independent firm long before Brenda seized total control after his supposed financial mismanagement. When corporate shortcuts threatened public safety and generated massive regulatory fines, I was the one forced to quietly cover the deficits to protect the family name. I did the math, I fixed the structural flaws, and I kept my mouth shut. That was the old contract. Now, years later, I was sitting in my Baltimore office as a certified forensic building safety architect. My reputation was built on cold, hard facts. I had programmed an automated alert system to track any new public municipal filings tied to my architectural seal. When a state regulator flagged a failing high-rise development in Atlanta for a standard audit, my system immediately intercepted the anomaly. As I methodically examined the authorization seals on the digital blueprints, my screen illuminated a glaring anomaly. I zoomed in on the structural waivers. There, stamped across multi-million-dollar documents, was my own professional architect seal. It had been digitally cloned and applied to projects I had never seen. The building in question was being constructed on unstable sinkhole soil. It was a catastrophic collapse waiting to happen. And the credit line secured by my forged signature wasn't just funding the concrete and steel. I traced the outgoing wire transfers. To bypass the bank's commercial lending oversight, Brenda had created shell companies with construction-sounding names. Botanical Site Prep LLC and Fabrication and Silk Logistics were actually the historic wedding venue and the custom dress designer. Massive sums were being funneled directly into these disguised accounts. I leaned back in my chair. I studied the shadow of the forged seal, recognizing the profound link between personal family exploitation and systemic corporate corruption. When a family treats a person as an asset to be drained, it is a very short leap to treating public safety as a mere regulatory hurdle. The forged seal wasn't just a stolen graphic, it was the ultimate manifestation of Brenda's belief that my identity, my credentials, and my legal liabilities were her personal property. She had weaponized my hard-earned professional standing to finance her golden child's luxury wedding, entirely indifferent to the fact that her fraudulent high-rise could cost hundreds of lives. They had moved from emotional theft to federal crimes without missing a beat. This wasn't a family misunderstanding. It was a massive liability. I didn't feel a shred of panic. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon anger, but there was only absolute ice-cold clarity. They weren't just risking my license. They were building a monument to their own greed on a foundation of literal and figurative quicksand. Every unauthorized stamp was a documented felony. Every wire transfer to the Botanical Conservatory was a verifiable chain of evidence. They had handed me the exact tools required to dismantle their entire operation. I started downloading the metadata, taking screenshots, and logging IP addresses. I compiled the evidence with absolute precision. The wire transfers mapping the flow of illicit funds from the high-rise credit line to the wedding vendors were beautifully linear. The Botanical Conservatory deposit, the custom floral arrangements, the catering retainers, all of it was financed by my stolen professional credibility. My family had finally crossed the line from toxic relatives to corporate criminals, and they had left a digital paper trail a mile wide. I did not reach out to them for an explanation. Instead, I sent a formal cease and desist notice through my legal counsel regarding the unauthorized use of my architectural seal. Rather than offering remorse or attempting to negotiate, Brenda and Kayla doubled down on their delusion. Conflict was initiated at 11:51 in the morning. By 12:03, their retaliation was already in motion. It was entirely predictable. My phone rang. The caller ID flashed Kayla's name. I answered and immediately hit record. She was calling from a boutique, fitting the rustle of expensive silk audible in the background. She hissed into the receiver, accusing me of throwing a massive tantrum out of sheer professional jealousy. She demanded I drop the legal notice immediately, threatening to destroy whatever reputation I had left over what she called meaningless paperwork technicalities. She didn't deny the forgery. She was just annoyed that I was disrupting her dress fitting. I didn't argue. I simply let her speak, logging her admission of guilt into my growing file. Within 2 hours, Brenda escalated the situation publicly. She released a carefully crafted statement on her corporate social media channels. She framed me as an unstable, estranged outcast who had abandoned the family business out of sheer arrogance and incompetence. She claimed my legal notice was a desperate attempt to extort money from my successful sister on the eve of her wedding. The narrative was designed to discredit me before I could go public with the fraud. It was a classic public relations maneuver, prioritizing brand protection over federal law. Then came Arthur. My father bypassed the public theater and went straight for the emotional manipulation. He sent a series of silent, guilt-inducing text messages. "Please don't do this to your mother," he wrote. "Keep the peace, Aria. It's your sister's big day. Let it go and we can sort the money out later." He was the weak-willed enabler, begging the victim to absorb the damage so he wouldn't have to face the conflict. Their synchronized escalation removed any remaining doubt I might have harbored. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were simply shocked that I had stopped playing along. There was no misunderstanding to clear up. There was no relationship left to salvage. They had stolen my identity, financed a luxury wedding with fraudulent funds, jeopardized public safety, and then attempted to gaslight me into silence. The moral clarity I felt in that moment was absolute. I felt no sadness. I felt no despair. I just opened my laptop and continued to methodically organize the digital evidence. I blocked their numbers the second the evidence was secured. Every text message from Arthur, every public post from Brenda, and every recorded threat from Kayla was meticulously cataloged into a secure cloud drive. I was a forensic architect, trained to find the structural weaknesses in failing buildings. My family was a failing building, and I had just located the exact stress point that would bring their entire fraudulent empire crashing down. I engaged the services of Julian, a seasoned corporate compliance attorney who operated with the same cold precision that I did. We sat in a sterile conference room, the table covered in financial disclosures and digital forensic reports. We did not discuss family dynamics or emotional betrayal. We discussed actionable evidence. Together, we formalized the chain of custody for every stolen document. Our first move was decisive and immediate. We secured emergency freeze orders on the active $1.2 million credit line tied to my stolen architectural seal. We then formally notified the State Commercial Lending Board of the ongoing fraud. Julian filed the injunctions with zero hesitation. The trap was set, and the financial arteries feeding Brenda's empire were severed. As we dug deeper into the lending profiles, we unearthed another layer of the transaction. Brenda hadn't just cloned my professional stamp. She had utilized my clean historical credit file. During my years grinding in the Savannah archive, I had meticulously rebuilt my financial standing. Brenda had hijacked that spotless record to backstop her massive, fraudulent corporate loans. She had leveraged my integrity to fund her corruption. I looked at the bank records spanning across the table. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. Instead of a messy, emotional shouting match, I approached the ultimate betrayal as a cold, methodical audit. I de-romanticized the entire concept of our blood relation. I was a hostile auditor examining a corrupt corporate entity. Every unauthorized transaction, every digitally forged seal, and every fraudulent transfer was stripped of its emotional weight and cataloged into an unassailable legal affidavit. We traced the $1.2 million. We tracked the disbursements piercing through her shell, companies moving directly to the catering company, the string quartet, the dress designer, and the venue. Everything was paid for by a credit line secured by federal wire fraud and identity theft. Julian looked across the table, verifying the final injunction paperwork. I didn't feel an ounce of panic about destroying my mother's real estate firm or ruining my sister's wedding. I was simply executing a legal correction. They had treated my life as a disposable asset, a convenient line of credit they could tap into whenever their own resources fell short. Now, the principal was due, and the penalties were severe. I signed the affidavit with a steady hand. The documentation was bulletproof. I reviewed the final summary with Julian. We confirmed the exact timestamps for the freeze orders. They would take effect precisely on Saturday morning, intersecting flawlessly with the final vendor payments for the wedding. Brenda's accounts would register as frozen, triggering immediate alerts across multiple commercial banking systems. This was the architecture of retaliation. It required no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, and no desperate pleas for understanding. It only required objective data and the ruthless application of the law. I had spent my entire life trying to engineer a way to fit into their family structure. Now, I was dismantling it with a single, perfectly executed legal strike. The chain of custody was flawless, and the evidence was absolute. While Julian finalized the freeze orders, I continued to review the historical land registry records attached to the high-rise development loan. I was looking for secondary liabilities, searching for any additional fraudulent collateral Brenda might have pledged. Instead, I uncovered a darker, much more systemic truth. I traced the parcel identification numbers back through 12 years of municipal zoning changes and corporate acquisitions. The unstable plot of land where Brenda's fraudulent high-rise was currently being erected was not just a random commercial property. The coordinates matched perfectly. It was the exact historical lot where my late father's independent engineering firm had stood before Brenda, engineered its sudden, mysterious bankruptcy over a decade prior. I stared at the glowing screen. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. 12 years ago, Brenda hadn't just watched my father's business fail. She had orchestrated the liquidation to absorb his assets into her own real estate portfolio. She had destroyed the man's legacy, driving him into the weak-willed submission that now defined his existence. And now, she was building her crowning real estate monument directly over the ashes of his life's work. But the cruelty didn't stop there. She was financing this ultimate monument to her own ego, using my stolen credit and my forged professional seal, while constructing it on unstable sinkhole soil. She had consumed my father's past, and she was actively consuming my future to pay for it. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only absolute terrifying clarity. This wasn't just a corporate crime. It was a generational execution. Brenda hadn't just stolen my identity to pay for Kayla's wedding. She was utilizing my hard-earned credentials to build a literal tower on the grave of my father's independence. She believed she could endlessly cannibalize her own family to construct her empire without consequence. I saved the historical registry files and attached them to Julian's affidavit. The double twist of this discovery completely eradicated any lingering ghost of family loyalty. It wasn't enough to simply freeze the funds. The public needed to understand the exact nature of the foundation Brenda Vance built her life upon. She was erecting glass and steel over a sinkhole of deceit. My breathing remained slow and measured. The anger I felt was highly concentrated, refined into a laser-focused objective. There would be no mercy. There would be no quiet settlement behind closed doors. Brenda wanted a public monument. I was going to give her a public demolition. I meticulously cross-referenced the old bankruptcy filings with the new construction permits. Every signature, every date, every transfer of deeds confirmed the deliberate destruction of my father's firm. It was a perfectly executed hostile takeover disguised as a family tragedy. Brenda had treated us all as expendable raw materials. I packed my briefcase with the printed affidavits. The cold logic of the numbers provided an undeniable comfort. The Vance family thought they were untouchable architects of their own reality. But I was the forensic specialist, and I knew exactly how to bring a corrupt structure down to the dirt. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear skies and the suffocating scent of expensive floral arrangements. I drove to the historic Botanical Conservatory in Atlanta. I didn't wear a bridesmaid gown. I wore a sharp, dark emerald dress and the heavy archive restoration watch I'd bought during my night shifts in Savannah. It was a reminder of exactly what it took to survive them. As I walked into the venue, Brenda immediately approached. She wore her polished public smile, stepping quickly to intercept me before I could mingle. She was already attempting to weaponize the guests' perceptions, whispering through gritted teeth that I was making a fool of myself by showing up. I didn't engage. At 11:50 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I walked directly into the holding suite. I locked the heavy oak doors of the side conference room behind me. Inside were Brenda, Arthur, Kayla in her custom silk gown, and the groom. His name was Liam, a sharp, highly successful commercial lending manager. He looked up, confused by the sudden intrusion. "This isn't revenge," I said smoothly, pulling the dossier from my bag. "It's accounting." I handed the file directly to Liam, bypassing my family completely. "I suggest you review the financial foundations of your marriage." Brenda lunged forward to intercept the folder, but Liam was already opening it. As a lending manager, it took him less than 40 seconds to comprehend the documents. He stared at the state freeze notice on the active $1.2 million credit line. He examined the forensic proof of the digitally forged structural seal. He looked at the wire transfer logs, proving that the luxury wedding he was about to walk into was entirely funded by federal wire fraud and identity theft. Kayla started crying, a high-pitched sound of panic, demanding to know what I had done. Arthur stared at the floor. Brenda finally dropped the facade, her face contorting with rage as she realized the funds were locked. But Liam didn't yell. His professional reputation was built on risk assessment, and he had just realized his entire marriage was a catastrophic liability. Without a word to Kayla, Liam turned and unlocked the conference room doors. He walked straight out into the grand glass atrium, where 300 of Atlanta's elite were seated, waiting for the processional. I followed calmly in his wake. Liam walked past the floral arches, stepped up to the string quartet, and calmly took the microphone from the lead violinist. The music screeched to a halt. The massive room fell dead silent. "I have a question for my bride." Liam's voice echoed through the pristine glass atrium, cold and amplified. He looked directly at Kayla, who was standing paralyzed in the doorway. "Can you explain to me, and to everyone here, why your estranged sister's hijacked credit file is acting as the guarantor, and her forged architectural seal was used to secure the fraudulent commercial loan paying for this wedding?" The silence that followed was absolute. 300 wealthy guests, business partners, and socialites sat frozen, their minds collectively processing the word forged. The pristine illusion of the Vance family shattered, raining down on them like the glass ceiling above. They weren't shocked by what they'd done, they were shocked that I had stopped playing along. I stood quietly near the back of the atrium, checking the archive restoration watch on my wrist. It was exactly 12 o'clock. The freeze orders were officially active. I watched Brenda's carefully constructed social empire disintegrate in real time. She tried to step forward, to laugh it off as a misunderstanding, to snatch the microphone, but the sheer weight of the public humiliation pinned her to the floor. Arthur simply turned away, unable to face the crowd. Kayla sobbed, her perfect designer gown pooling around her as she realized the transaction of her life had just been voided. The audit was successfully delivered, and the balance sheet was permanently closed. The wedding dissolved into complete and utter chaos. The immediate fallout was catastrophic. The venue managers, alerted by the frozen accounts, abruptly cut the power to the catering and entertainment. The wealthy attendees scrambled to the exits, eager to distance themselves from the imploding Vance empire before the subpoenas started flying. By Monday morning, state investigators had coordinated with local authorities to raid Brenda's corporate offices, securing digital devices and confiscating laptops. The legal fallout was swift, clinical, and merciless. Brenda faced multiple criminal wire fraud charges, intense federal financial monitoring, and the mandatory liquidation of all her commercial showroom assets to cover the massive restitution ordered by the state lending board. Her fraudulent real estate monument was halted indefinitely, the land seized by creditors to repay the stolen loans. Arthur lost his remaining titular position in the company, and whatever shredded social standing he had managed to cling to. Kayla's engagement to Liam ended permanently before she even reached the altar. Stripped of her fraudulent funds, her luxury lifestyle, and her family prestige, she was forced into a quiet move to a regional nonprofit design center, ordered by the court into hundreds of hours of community service and crushing restitution payments as part of her plea deal. I didn't stick around to watch them pack up their ruined lives. I returned to Baltimore and officially established my own independent forensic compliance consultancy, building a firm grounded in absolute transparency and uncompromising ethics. My first executive action was setting up a permanent $750 emergency grant at the Technical Archive Institute in Savannah. It was an enduring lifeline designed specifically for the next student who walked through their doors with nothing but a desperate need to rebuild their foundation from scratch. I had closed the ledger on the Vance family. The accounting was permanently balanced, and the generational debts were finally settled. I've come to realize that the architecture of renewal demands absolute public truth. You cannot build a stable future on a foundation of hidden resentments and silent compliance. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free from the expectation that toxic people will eventually change. When you stop hoping for an apology that will never arrive, you take your power back. You do not have to destroy the people who mistreated you to reclaim your life. Sometimes the absolute strongest response is simply to stop lying for them, stop financing their comfort with your dignity, and stop treating access to you as a permanent family right. I spent years believing that if I just worked harder, if I just fixed enough of their mistakes, they would finally see my value. But the truth is, people who exploit you do not value your presence. They only value your utility. A relationship that survives only through your continuous silence is not peace, it is captivity with better decorations. Healing begins the moment you decide that your self-respect is no longer the currency paying for someone else's delusion. If you are standing in the shadows of someone else's ego, sacrificing your own structural integrity to keep their facade from crumbling, it is time to walk away. Leave the keys on the counter. Audit your own worth. and refuse to let anyone forge your signature on a life you do not want. So ask yourself this: if protecting your family's image requires you to disappear, whose family are you really protecting?